Valarie Hurst Show. In our last episode, Dr. Tyra Hodge shares her harrowing story about her journey, her story of overcoming so many obstacles in life. And so we have her back again, and we just want to share the rest of her story. So thank you for being with us today. Welcome back, Tyra.
Thank you, Valarie. This has been a wonderful experience.
Well, we're so glad to have you. So I know last time we talked about you had just found out you were pregnant, and so now you had just given birth, reading your story, and there's still this lifestyle you were being drawn back to.
Yes, and so, I guess if you live a certain way for a while, it's kind of hard to pull completely out of it. And so I had this one struggle that I had this beautiful child, and then on this other hand, I still wanted to be out there partying and hanging out a little bit. I was able to stay clean, for a while until I had my son, but I knew in the back of my mind that as soon as first chance I get, I was going to go party again. And so, and I did.
2-3 weeks later, was it?
But, yep. About two. The
So
stitches have been healed.
that just shows you though how much the addiction had on you. And just the lifestyle of all of it, just the draw of it, just how much of a grip it had on you.
Yes.
Wow. And so what kind of played out after that?
Well, one night I did go back to work. I was working at a club down in Galveston. I needed a babysitter, and so I was roommating with a friend in the Clear Lake area, and so I had another friend babysit my son. And so I had gone into work, no problem, and about 11 o'clock at night, I get a phone call, and it's actually CPS, and they had found me at my job. And they had said that my son had been taken, and I needed, I'm like, I'm thinking, what's going on,
Right.
what's happening, he was with the babysitter, and come to find out, when I had gotten there, they didn't want to release him to me, and so I had to call my mom to go get him. And come to find out, they kept asking me about leaving him at a bar, and I was like, what are you talking about? I didn't take my son to a bar, And what had happened was the babysitter took him to a bar and asked somebody to watch him, and took off and never came back. And so there was a whole bunch of confusion to whether that was me or not, and so it was not me. And so I had to go through the whole thing of trying to convince people that wasn't me that had done that. And so even once that was cleared up, there was still the fact of me being irresponsible with who I left my son with. And so the person that I had left him with had just got out of rehab, and at that point I thought rehab made you better. And so not really knowing that's a process. And so I did. So my son had to stay with my mom. Even though it wasn't me that had taken my son to the bar, I was still being looked at as a bad parent. I wasn't a great parent anyway, but this brought up complications, and so my son had to stay with my mom while I was supposed to be going to parenting classes. But at that time I still didn't go to parenting classes or anything.
Okay. One point you said, that's another thing about drugs. They warp your perception about the people and situations around you. I honestly thought everyone was out to get me.
Oh yeah, I blamed that on everybody. I blamed it on the babysitter. I blamed it on, my mom, even though she was just helping. I could not see that it was my bad decisions that was causing all this to happen.
Wow. So here you are now. This is your second pregnancy, I believe.
Okay,
Your
so
vet.
right, and so
After all this had happened,
I ended
with your
up
first
getting
baby.
pregnant again. And
Mhm.
actually, which is funny, is that I had another moment of despair and I wanted to die again, and I had tried to kill myself again and it didn't work, you know. And at this point, I just kind of throw my hands up. I can't even kill myself right, you know. And so, I mean, and it sounds, you know, horrible, and I make light of it, but I ended up being pregnant again. And so now, you know, I had a son that was staying with my mom. I was pregnant again. And to top it off, I had come home from work one night, put my key in the door, and I could not get in. Well, I had been locked out of my apartment due to non-payment. I was literally homeless on the street with nowhere to go. I couldn't go stay with my mom because she had my son, and nobody, you know, really wanted to be around me. And you know, all my friends that had been my friends up to this point, they were ghosts.
And that's when you find out who your true friends are, right?
Exactly, exactly. And
Unfortunately.
so there was no one there to help me. I was stuck, pregnant, locked out of my apartment, and so all I could do was just walk around on the streets because I had nowhere to stay.
Wow. So you just literally walked around on the streets.
I walked
and-
around on the streets, stayed the night in, you know, in 24-hour, you know, restaurants and a bathroom. I mean, there came a point I felt like I couldn't keep the baby because, one, I needed to work, and I couldn't really work in and out of clubs, being pregnant, and so I really thought at this point that I was going to have an abortion. That way I could continue to work. And so, and I actually was about to make a phone call. I had walked to a stop and go and borrowed their telephone book so I could go use the telephone. I didn't have any money, and so I was looking for a 1-800 number, and I found one. And so instead of a doctor's clinic answering, it was a maternity home that was in Wichita Falls.
Okay. And so you call, and a woman answers, and you thought you were calling an abortion clinic.
Yes,
right?
and I'm like, is this the doctor's office? And the lady on the other end, she's like, no, this is Loving Christian Maternity Home. How can I help you? What are you looking for? And I thought I was calling a doctor's office for an abortion. So the lady kind of kept me on the phone and asked me about my situation. And I told her, actually, I'd been locked out of my apartment. I don't have anywhere to go, and I'm pregnant. Again, I said I had told her the whole story. She kept me on the phone for about an hour. I'm sitting outside of a convenience store talking on the payphone, back when we had payphones. And the lady she was so kind. And she had said, you know, I tell you what, you know, I didn't have any transportation. I didn't have a car. And she said if I could get there, she would hold a bed for me. They usually don't hold beds, but she would hold one for me if I could get there.
Well, hold that thought. We'll be right back after this commercial break.
They're not into volume, they're into quality. And that's what really sold us on making that selection. That's what we found throughout the entire process.
Having been in the pool industry for over 30 years in a major market, we have the big town experience, but the small town integrity.
You've earned your place in the sun with the Minion Pool Group.
So I talked to Barbara on the phone, and she said that she would hold a bed for me in Wichita Falls. Well, Wichita Falls was 9 hours away. So I had gotten in touch with the Crisis Pregnancy Center in Pasadena, Texas. I was able to get a ride over there, and I wanted to see about, you know, if there was since there was a maternity home there, maybe there was one closer to us, because I knew that I could not get to Wichita Falls without having transportation. And so I was able to get a ride to the pregnancy center. They confirmed my pregnancy. pregnancy. And my counselor's name was Peggy, and she was so kind. And
How long were you on the streets before you were able to get somewhere to safety?
off and on for a couple of weeks.
Wow. Okay.
Off and on for a couple of weeks.
Wow.
And so I talked to Peggy. I would make enough money to maybe pay for a hotel a night, and then maybe I wouldn't have money for a hotel, or or tried to stay too long at somebody's house, and so Peggy, my case manager, we had gone to, she had talked to a couple of people that had maternity homes in our area, but the problem was that most of the maternity homes, you had to be a teenager, and so I was already in my mid-20s, and so I didn't qualify, so that was a problem. And there was one place, and it just didn't seem right. I think we both thought that maybe I just needed to get away. And so Peggy had talked to my mother and had talked to CPS, and they had worked out a deal to where I could stay with my mom until we could figure out how they can get me to Wichita Falls. So we decided on Wichita Falls together. And
Because your mother was not letting you come back home?
not really, because I didn't live with her, so she was taking care of my son. And there's sometimes rules with CPS about the parent, if they see you as unfit, sometimes you can't be around. And so we were able to get approval for me to stay there just for a short time, so I could but actually CPS gave me a list of things to do, and so I had to complete that, and once I completed that, I could get my son back. And so even with that, we felt it was better for my son to stay with my mom for a while because I was homeless. And so Peggy had called, and she said that they were going to drive me to Wichita Falls themselves. And I'm like, wow, these people don't know me.
Wow.
And so, and they did. They drove me 9 hours to Wichita Falls, dropped me off, and turned around and drove back.
Wow.
And so there, yes, I mean, so much love. And
Right.
I remember driving in that little compact car up there, just thinking, if these people would take out this much time for me, maybe, just maybe, there was a little bit of hope for my future, or maybe God actually didn't hate me, and maybe He did love me.
And that is such a, I think, ingrained belief that a lot of people have, that God is this angry God. He's not.
He's waiting to strike you down.
Right. Very far from the truth. Very loving and very kind. And they were a perfect picture of that, of the unconditional love of God.
Absolutely.
For them to drive all the way.
Drop me off and drive all the way back. And this is the thing, if you read the Bible, you just find over and over of stories of flawed people. Flawed people, people that we wouldn't even think about giving a second chance, but yet God does.
Many, over and over. You said after about 4 months of using, something strange happened. I heard my spirit telling me it was time to make a choice. A voice inside me was telling me that this lifestyle couldn't go on. I could either continue to do drugs or choose God.
That day, that voice that was telling me to make a choice, it wasn't like an honor, it was just just an overwhelming unction to make a choice. And so that day, I chose life. Not just that, I chose the life of my children, because I knew that their future would not be good if I continued on that path. And not just that, I wanted to be a good mother. I didn't know how to be a good mother, but I wanted to be a good mother. Not just that, I wanted to be a decent person, and I wanted things for our lives. I didn't want to struggle the way I had been struggling. And so I did that day. I made a choice, one, to choose life, but to choose our life as a family.
And that's what you kept saying. I made a choice. I made a choice. I made a choice. He said, so I made my choice. I made a choice to live my life fully rather than die on the streets. I made a choice to be an example to my children. I made a choice to have food in my refrigerator and my electric bill paid on time. I made a choice. And I've heard that so many times when people are struggling with addiction. I ask them, what is the one thing that made you decide to stop? And it was that conscious choice. So what kind of started happening next? You're here at this maternity home now?
Yes, in Wichita Falls. And the maternity home mother was named Norma. And she was so sweet and so kind. And for the first time in my life, you know, and I know she loved all of the girls that was there, but I felt like I was her favorite, you know, and she took an interest in me. And for the first time, I felt really loved by somebody, and it was unconditional. And so I believe that there's times that people are brought into your life for a certain time, for a certain purpose, and they don't always stay there, but they're there. And that at that moment, I needed to be shown love, a pure love, and that's what the maternity home did.
What's happening? Like, you're getting a little teary-eyed.
I
emotional.
am.
Like,
You know,
what's going
because, you know, Norma, I don't know if she was alive. She was 70 something then. You know, my oldest is 21. And so the love that was poured out on me there, and even with the love that the women from the Crisis Pregnancies Center showed on me, you know, and I still have a relationship with Christy, that was the director back then, and the counselor Peggy. We still have a relationship to this day. And so I always keep them up to date with any milestones that I'm going through.
Yeah.
And so I did. I had my children, and I was able to get my son back. I followed all my rules and went to my parenting classes and got him back. I stayed in Wichita Falls maybe for a year and a half or so, and in 2000 I came back home.
Okay. And what happened then?
Well, one day I had just come back home, hadn't been home long, and I really hadn't built up all that trust with my mom yet. I was at a point to where, you know, I was going to go back and work in restaurants. I was going to stay away from the clubs, but, you know, I was good at waiting tables, and so I figured I'd work in restaurants. But even with that, it was kind of hard because that runs into the night, and I was kind of afraid of getting mixed up in that nightlife again. But I didn't know what to do because, you know, it was either minimum wage, you know, I knew I needed a place to live. I think my mom had given me about 2 months to get myself together and to, you know, try to get a place. But you being a single parent, you can't afford childcare in a place to live, not on minimum wage. And so that day I was driving down I-45, heading towards Galveston. I had been running errands for my mom. And so I was just singing in the car. I was just singing, you know, all the Christian praise and worship songs I knew. And there came this one point, I had turned off the radio, and I just had to finish singing, peace, peace, wonderful peace. And so, and at the end of that song, I just kind of, as I was driving, I was like, Father, God, what do you want me to do with my life? There was this overwhelming unction in that day. I knew I heard the voice of God. And that voice said to go to school. It was like, even though it was overwhelming feeling, but it was like a whisper yet in my ear that said go to school. And I knew that I was being directed that day. And so I drove off of 45, because I knew where Alvin Community College was. So, and that's one thing that I learned throughout the years. whenever I hear something or anytime I heard about an opportunity or something, I always jump on it. So that's been one of my keys to success. You always jump on it.
Right.
So that day I drove all the way down to Alvin Community College and went in and waited to talk to a counselor. And so I talked to the counselor, and she began to ask me questions about what type of thing I would like to do if I was to go to school for. But I could not pay for childcare and pay for an apartment. So I was really sad, and I was upset with the Lord. And I've never said that very often, because I know that God is sovereign and He does what He wants to do. But at this point, I was like, I cannot believe that God would dangle this carrot. And I remember saying that in front of my face, and then, and then snatch it away. So I went back up to the college a couple of days later, and I spoke with the same counselor, and I told her, I said, I'm going to have to drop out already because there's no way I can afford an apartment and afford childcare. And she's like, well, let me talk to our department here at the college, because a lot of times there's some scholarship money for childcare. So I'm getting a little bit excited, thinking that, oh, okay. And so we go to talk to the child care person at the college, and she's like, oh, we don't have any money, that comes in, as quick, it goes out as quick as it comes in. And so, I'm sad again. But then she said, I have a friend. And so she said, she handed me a card, and I said, oh, okay. She's like, I'm going to make a phone call and let her know that you're going to come see her. Can you go see her right now if she's available? I said, yeah, I'll go see her. And so she called her, and the lady said that she'd wait for me at the workforce. I know the workforce has had different names in Texas, Texas Workforce, Texas WorkSource, but anyway, Texas Works. And so this office was going to be in the Clear Lake office, and so she wanted me to go up there and speak to this lady. So I went up there to Texas WorkSource, and like I said, I don't remember what the name was then. We were talking about year 2000. So I walked in, and I talked to the lady at the reception desk. I was like, I'm here to see this person that's on this card. And so I'm just standing there in the lobby waiting. And so a lady comes back, and I wish I could remember her name, but I don't. So she comes from the back, and she said, hi, I'm such and such. Can you tell me why you're here? So, I told her everything. I said, I was hooked on drugs, and I moved to Wichita Falls, and the voice of the Lord told me to make a choice. And I had just moved back home, and I was driving down the road, and I asked God, what did He want me to do with my life? And a voice told me to go to school, and I drove down to Alvin Community College, and I walked in and I walked out with a scholarship, and now I'm going to have to drop out of school because I can't afford childcare. And she just gave me the weirdest look, and I knew I probably gave her too much information, but I just felt like I needed to tell her exactly what was going on. I was very frustrated.
Wow, so you have all of these scholarships now. You went to college, and what did you go to college for?
Well, I started off going for the chemical dependency counselor license and stuff, and I did all the coursework for that. But after doing that for a while, I realized, I do not want to work with adults with drug problems. And so I could just continue to go to school, and even during that, there was times to stay in school. I had to go homeless. I had to go and move into a shelter. And so because I knew that's what I was supposed to do. And so sometimes to do what you're called to do, you have to go that extra mile. And so I did. I went, and in 2007 I got my first degree. But I never felt like the Lord said, stop going to school. So I went back and got my master's. And I still never felt like the Lord told me to quit going to school. So I kept going, and it took 7 years, but I earned my PhD in education.
You did it, though. You did it despite the odds.
Yes.
Despite all of the setbacks.
Yes.
All of the trauma you went through.
Bad marriage, an abusive marriage. overcame that.
Incredible.
Having to live in a shelter, behavioral problems with my kids, ironing those out, becoming a good parent, having some more kids, and becoming a mentor to other parents. And so that's, you know, it's been a ride, but it's been worth it.
Definitely. I love at the end you said, the burning mess of my former life sparked flames of a new destiny. I rose out of the flames like a phoenix. Tyra, Dr. Tyra Hodge. I know
Still
you
fun to
have
see her.
but I cannot commend you enough for your bravery, your resilience, your tenacity to get back up again and again. Your story is so powerful, and your story really deserves to be in the movies. And I hope someone out there hears her story and gets her book, Out of the Ashes, A Wounded Daughter's Diary, because it's a story of not just resilience, overcoming, and just inspiration, but I really just want to encourage you, no matter what is going on in your life, to get back up. If Tyra can do it with everything that she's been through, you can do it. Out of the ashes.
You know,
Thanks for
Valarie,
watching.
I just want to say before we leave, you know, there is a strength inside of everyone. And sometimes we just need to figure out how to pull it out.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tyra. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for allowing me.
You're welcome. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye. When we embrace our healing and release the traumas of the past, patterns begin to break, cycles stop, and life begins to take on a whole new meaning.